Back to Exodus. Join me back in Exodus chapter 7. Really enjoying this study of this ancient story, which is timeless and so relevant for us today, so helpful, especially as it points us to Jesus, our great King, our great God, our great Savior. So looking forward to another time here with you. And a message that I'm going to call the God of death and life. And we'll see, as with this whole book in the Bible, this whole book of Exodus, this whole story, it is about freedom. It's about the deepest form of freedom. Freedom we find in our relationship with our Creator God. Now, there are all kinds of freedom that we experience in this world. The Pierce family felt a form of freedom on June 12th. Friends of mine know, Dave's laughing right now, I talked with the other guys on the leadership team about this. We just kept looking forward to June 12th because that's the last day of school. And so that's freedom for my girls, my children, and freedom for Jill. And I was thinking, more importantly, right, Jill? More importantly, freedom for my lovely wife who has suffered immensely the past few months teaching. I was thinking, oh, this is a little bit of a side note, but I was thinking of the old song. Do you remember as a kid the feeling of the last day of school? And we had this song that we would sing, kind of an anthem, as it were. No more pencils, no more books, no more teachers' dirty looks. Well, listen, it turns out teachers have a song too. The lyrics of which I'm not going to tell you. But they too are happy for the freedom. So that's a kind of freedom, right? And it has a feel to it. Even this time of year, we can kind of all sense it, relate to it, even if it's just thinking back in your memory to what that was like. There are other forms of freedom in this world. Freedom of leaving maybe a hard job or a boss you didn't like, leaving behind, going to a new job. That has a feel to it that's kind of a relief, right? Freedom of getting out of a bad, unhealthy relationship. Some of those types of freedom that we experience can not only be freedom in terms of a circumstantial change, but we feel freedom on the inside, a little bit more lightness, a little bit more joy as a result of that. So they're like these layers of freedom, right? And what we want and what we long for is freedom at the level of the heart. We want to be free. We want to be joyful. We want to feel alive. We don't want to feel like we're under someone else's control or domination. And this story in Exodus is a form of domination that in natural terms is the worst. I mean, the ancient Israelites were slaves there in Egypt, suffering immensely under Pharaoh's leadership, under his demands, and it was brutal. And so as we've enjoyed moving our way through this story, we're seeing God is determined to liberate them. Last week we talked about God reaching down through his strong hand. God was going to set them free, do for them what they could never do for themselves, because they were completely and utterly powerless. There's no way they were going to save themselves. Well, similarly, when it comes to like the deepest form of freedom that we long for, it requires a work of God. God must do something. And what we're going to see this morning is that what God does has to do with death and life. It has to do with death and life and God's sovereignty over death and life, both in the natural realm and also, more importantly, in the spiritual realm. And we'll come to see what that means as we study together this morning. But we're in Exodus chapter 7, and this is the well-known portion of the story regarding the 10 plagues, which we're going to call the miracles of death, okay? They are signs, they are wonders, they are things that God performed in the process of delivering his people. And they were miraculous in nature. And as you see on the screens there, that they are a certain kind of miracle. They are miracles of death. In this section, chapters 7 through 12, and we're not going to go through all the details, okay? We're going to go kind of high level. We're going to hit this in a summary fashion, just to mainly highlight how these wonders, these signs, these miracles have to do with death. Now, if you were to scan through looking for the word death in these chapters, you would see death occurring over and over and over again. Somewhere around 13 times death is mentioned explicitly. And not only is it mentioned explicitly, but there's a lot of implications for death. There's a lot of devastation going on, and we'll talk about that. But these are really miracles of death. And it creates kind of a contrast. If you think back and remember the prior context, there's a kind of human sovereignty over death that you see earlier in the story. For example, with Pharaoh, didn't he exercise a form of control over death when he was like working the Israelites to death? He was threatening them with death if they were to stop working. There's that. There's the fact that he gave this decree that all the newborn Hebrew sons, remember that? The newborn Hebrew baby boys should be put to death. He wanted to murder Moses. That was his plan, and Moses escaped. And then you see with Moses, you see a form of human control over death when Moses takes the life of that one Egyptian and killed that man, and then he tries to preserve his own life, and so he runs because he knows of the threat of death under Pharaoh. He knows Pharaoh is out to get him. So like a fugitive, he flees, trying to preserve his own life. So these death and life matters. There's a human level to them and a human aspect to them that is real, but it's limited. The scope of human control over these matters of death and life is limited, and we're going to see this morning is God's level of control is like high-level control. Significant control. The scope of His sovereignty over death and life is far beyond, that's to put it mildly, far beyond our own. And when it comes to God bringing us to freedom, it has to do with us realizing just how big and powerful and sovereign God is. And it has to do with us realizing that God is both the one who is in control of death and also in control of life. And that is both on the natural level and most importantly on the spiritual level. So again, that's what we're going to be talking about when it comes to these plagues. Now I want to read to you, kind of picking up where we left off last week in chapter 7, just the beginning of this section, okay? And he's going to say a little bit in this section about the first plague, which is turning the Nile River to blood. And so I have a graphic here I'm going to put on the screen that just illustrates a little bit of what is going on. So let's read together, starting in verse 8. Let's read about this confrontation between Moses and Aaron and Pharaoh, and then what God does through these plagues. Okay, so starting in verse 8, now the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying, when Pharaoh speaks to you, saying, work a miracle, then you shall say to Aaron, take your staff, throw it down before Pharaoh, that it may become a serpent. So Moses and Aaron came to Pharaoh, and thus they did just as the Lord had commanded, and Aaron threw down his staff before Pharaoh and his servants, and it became a serpent. Then Pharaoh called for the wise men and the sorcerers, and they also, the magicians of Egypt, did the same with their secret arts. For each one threw down his staff, and they turned into serpents. But Aaron's staff swallowed up their staffs. Yet Pharaoh's heart was hardened, and he did not listen to them as the Lord had said. So for starters here, there's this staff turning into a serpent, and then you notice the magicians, the sorcerers of Egypt, they were able to kind of duplicate that. And yet Aaron's serpent swallowed up their serpent, so this display of God's superior power, that's significant. We'll see more of that type of thing. So it begins that way, but then it moves on. Pharaoh's heart is hardened, and you know that that's part of the story, this cycle of Pharaoh hardening his own heart, God hardening Pharaoh's heart, but it's just a cyclical thing going on. Look at verse 14. Then the Lord said to Moses, Pharaoh's heart is stubborn. He refuses to let the people go. Go to Pharaoh in the morning as he is going out to the water, and station yourself to meet him on the bank of the Nile. And you shall take in your hand the staff that was turned into a serpent. You shall say to him, the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, sent me to you, saying, let my people go, that they may serve me in the wilderness. But behold, you have not listened until now. Thus says the Lord, by this you shall know that I am the Lord. Behold, I will strike the water that is in the Nile with the staff that is in my hand, and it will be turned to blood. The fish that are in the Nile will die, and the Nile will become foul, and the Egyptians will find difficulty in drinking water from the Nile. Then the Lord said to Moses, say to Aaron, Take your staff and stretch out your hand over the waters of Egypt, over the rivers, over the streams, over their pools, and over their reservoirs of water, that they may become blood, and there will be blood throughout all the land of Egypt, both in vessels of wood and in vessels of stone. So pause there for a moment. And you see what God is going to do, not only the Nile River turning to blood, but all the water in the land, in their vessels, even the things they're keeping in their homes, everything turning to blood. All illustrative of death. The Nile River representing life, their prosperity. It was the kind of the center of their economy, needed for their own drinking water, but also for their crops and things like that. And God is going to hit them right there at the core. Verse 20. So Moses and Aaron did even as the Lord had commanded, and he lifted up the staff and struck the water that was in the Nile in the sight of Pharaoh and in the sight of his servants. And all the water that was in the Nile was turned to blood. The fish that were in the Nile died, and the Nile became foul, so that the Egyptians could not drink water from the Nile. And the blood was through all the land of Egypt. But the magicians of Egypt did the same with their secret arts. And Pharaoh's heart was hardened, and he did not listen to them as the Lord had said. Then Pharaoh turned and went to his house with no concern even for this, feeling this false sense of relief. 2 more verses here. So all the Egyptians dug around the Nile for water to drink, for they could not drink of the water of the Nile. 7 days passed after the Lord had struck the Nile. So because their magicians were able to duplicate this sort of sign, Pharaoh felt relief. There was a false sense of confidence. And at this point, he's carrying on. But God had begun to demonstrate his power. And this is the first of many of these signs, 10 of them in total. Now, we're not going to look at each one in detail. We may come back around to those in future messages. We might mention a few of them. But for right now, I want to just summarize them for you. Okay, if you allow me to do that, from chapter 7 on to really chapter 12, you have the different plagues unfolding and the details, but if I can just give you a summary. We have the Nile River, we just talked about, turned to blood. Their life source is now filled with this symbol of death, and the fish literally die. The next one is the frogs, okay, and there were frogs like everywhere. It even says in the text that there were frogs in their homes, in their beds, in their cupboards, everywhere frogs. And you know what's worse than a land filled with frogs? A land filled with dead frogs. They died. And so they were stacking them up. Can you just imagine piles of rotting, decaying frogs? You know those piles of snow in the winter? 12 feet, 20 feet. Picture those as dying frogs. It's pretty bad, right? Frogs. Gnats, annoying, everywhere, gnats. And some of these signs the magicians try to duplicate, and then eventually they can't copy them. Then you got flies that just lay waste to the land. They just corrupt and ruin everything. Flies. Years ago, Jill and I were newly married, living in Florida. We had this nice little apartment in Oldsmar, Florida. And I will never forget waking up in the middle of the night with the feeling of flying ants ricocheting off my forehead. Our apartment had become infested with flying ants. That's just annoying. It's not fun. Look, these are annoyances, but these are annoyances that actually are devastating in terms of their livelihood. Their survival was at stake because these things were not only irritating them, but they were harming their food sources, their drinking water. I mean, terrifying. Those flies and their livestock died. Horses, donkeys, camels, oxen, sheep, all dying. Then there are boils. They start to develop these boils on all of the people, and even the magicians themselves are filled with boils such that they can't even stand These just gnarly, oozing, irritating, painful, itchy boils all over them. Then a hailstorm, massive hailstones, and God tells His people, put all your animals and all your people, stay inside, because these hailstones are deadly and they will wreak havoc on the Egyptians. Then locusts, swarms and swarms and swarms of locusts, which are they look kind of like grasshoppers, but they fly and they're just everywhere. Years ago, you could probably look this up on YouTube. I imagine there's still videos of this. But years ago in Madagascar, there was a sort of a plague of locusts. And I remember watching videos and there being these swarms of them. And from a distance, it looked like rain. There were so many. And they said even in just one small swarm, there were upwards of 1 billion locusts. So multiply that many times over. This place is filled with locusts. And again, they too are wreaking havoc, eating the vegetation. And then there's darkness over the land. And of course, as darkness goes on, things die. And then the 10th and final of the plagues is the Passover, where God tells His people to put the blood of a lamb on the doorposts, and that there was going to be an angel of death that would pass through and take the firstborn sons of the Egyptians, and God's people would be spared because of that atonement, that covering of the blood. So that too is a miracle or a sign of death. So on and on it goes. Pharaoh's heart is hardened. At times it softens a little bit, but then it hardens again as he stubbornly resists, as God demonstrates His sovereignty over death through these miracles. And then turn to chapter 10. In fact, I have this on the screen, so you can look there on the screen if you'd prefer. But this is just interesting what Pharaoh says here. This is between plague 8 and plague 9. He softens a little bit. And look what it says. It says, Pharaoh hurriedly called for Moses and Aaron and said, I have sinned against the Lord your God and against you. Now therefore, please forgive my sin only this once, and make supplication to the Lord your God that He would only remove this death from me. You see that? Pharaoh is experiencing this as deadly. Please just forgive my sin. Just this once. Remove this death from me. Turn ahead to chapter 12 and look at verses 30 through 33 of chapter 12. This is now related to the Passover, but kind of at the end of all of these devastating plagues. Verses 30 through 33, Pharaoh rose in the night, he and all his servants and all the Egyptians, and there was a great cry in Egypt, for there was no home where there was not someone dead. Then he called for Moses and Aaron at night and said, Rise up, get out from among my people, both you and the sons of Israel, and go, worship the Lord as you have said. Take both your flocks and your herds as you have said, and go, and bless me also, like on your way out. Please give a blessing. Kind of begging for a form of mercy at this point. And then look at verse 33. And I have this verse on the screen to show you again this key word where it says, The Egyptians urged the people to send them out of the land in haste, for they said, We will all be what? Dead. Just go already. This is killing us, literally. Through the plagues, God was hitting them right where they lived in more ways than one. In what they valued, and what they derived their sense of security and prosperity from. You can look up online and see the correlation between these different plagues and the gods of the Egyptians. Their pantheon, their whole big, long list of gods. And they had many, many hundreds. Some suggest thousands of gods. And you know what their gods were like? Their gods were kind of like humans. Slightly higher forms of humans who had a form of control over certain things. Like there was a god associated with the Nile River. There was a god associated with childbirth and healthy babies. There was a god associated with their crops. Gods associated with beauty. There were all these gods to whom the Egyptians looked for blessing, the good life. And God is showing through these signs and wonders, which are deadly, He is showing His sovereignty, that He is the true God, the supreme God. And just as the people interacted with their false gods in a kind of transactional way, as that was the case for them, God was teaching something very different about Himself. Something that helps us when it comes to this matter of real freedom, like spiritual freedom of the heart and the mind. But for the moment, just appreciate, if they were negotiating with their gods and that was working for them, now it's not working, is it? It's not working. Because every direction they look, it's devastation. Egypt has been turned into a wasteland. Just reminders of death all around them. Humiliating, terrifying, real suffering going on. And God was up to something in it. There's a phrase, I was talking with a friend recently, he's a pastor, and he's studying Ephesians in the New Testament, and he was talking about doing a lot of research on the polytheism of that day, what it was like for people to have these gods that they interacted with. And really it's similar previously, like ancient Egypt, same type of idea. It's really always been the same because this is what humans are like. This is something embedded in our DNA. This is something to do with how we operate, like our program and way of thinking. And this is what it was like. You give to the gods so that they might give to you. So their sacrifices, the vows they made, their feasts and festivals, it was all a way of negotiating, bargaining with the gods that they might get what they wanted from the gods. Whether that was their flocks would be healthy, their crops would be productive, they would have many children, their wealth would expand, whatever. It was just a way of managing life. It was a way of acknowledging transcendence, acknowledging human limitations, but yet still, catch this, still exercising human control over the deities such that people could get for themselves what they want or what they thought they needed. Now today in America, we don't have a purely polytheistic system. Most people are monotheistic or atheistic. And yet, something about this has not changed. It's not changed because it's part of our human way of operating. We too are very conditional and transactional. We too, by nature, we give so that we might receive. That is our nature, even in our human relationships. Ask yourself, is that true? Think of even the people you love the most, people in your family. You've done things for them, and you don't even mean to keep track of what you've done for them, but you kind of are keeping track. And you do enough without any kind of reciprocity, without anything coming back to you, and it doesn't take long to start saying, you know what, I don't like this. I'm not getting anything out of this. This is the word we use, this doesn't seem fair. Because fair would be, I give and you give back. Well, it was like this in terms of their religion, their view of the gods. And I would suggest that it's even like this with our view of the true God sometimes. It was for the Jewish people. Remember in the book of Isaiah the prophet, calls out the people because he says, look, you're doing all these sacrifices, you're going through the motions, but God's not looking for what you can give him in that way. You're not seeing him for who he really is, and that's what he wants for you. But so often, isn't it right that so often it's like this superstition by which we're just trying to manage life? It's just natural for all of us. And what God was up to back then, and what God is up to today, is he's helping us to see the way things really are. For starters, he's not small. He's not manipulated. He's not yielding control, relinquishing control to his creatures. He's not doing that. He's the sovereign king. He's working things out according to his plan and according to his timeline. He's giving us what he gives us, and he's withholding what he withholds. And it's up to him. And he is, back then, confronting their false sources or objects of hope and trust. The gods to whom they looked for their sense of security and prosperity. God was revealing the futility of all that. Today we can say that the types of things, we could just say people we look to, positions we want to have, possessions or material things. Like if we can just get more of these things, or if life can go a certain way according to like my plans, my hopes, my dreams, then I'll be complete. Then I'll have the good life, or I'll prosper. And there's a certain secular version of that. There's a religious version of that. But I mean, isn't it true that we're just so naturally drawn to things in this world being arranged a certain way that we can feel content with? Isn't that right? And don't we suffer and struggle when those areas are tampered with or somehow eliminated? When people to whom we look for help, or if we look to our sense of our own physical health or our bank account, I mean, we look and when something changes, where what previously was for us a source of joy becomes a source of great suffering. Something that was liberating becomes enslaving. I mean, I've heard it in so many different areas. I've heard people say, boy, this relationship started out so good. There was so much enjoyment and fun, and time went by, and it wasn't fun anymore. I've heard people say of substances, drugs or alcohol, in the beginning it was exciting, it gave me a sense of freedom and euphoria, but it became a slave master to me. And eventually, it was killing me. With regard to even something, here's a stark contrast, something like ministry, which is good to be serving God and opportunities we have, but perhaps you've had this experience where you pour yourself into a ministry and you're helping in some way. In the beginning, it's exciting and things are working and people are responding, but then people just keep being people, and sin surfaces and struggles and conflicts. And what was previously like this really enjoyable part of life and ministry becomes much less enjoyable, taxing, frustrating. There's all these examples, things that we look to be for us what only God Himself can be. We look to these things for a form of life, whether in the physical or the spiritual, and God has a way of either tampering with those things or completely taking them away, that we might see that He wasn't the one we were looking to. It was just, we were treating Him just like one of those false gods. We were treating Him as if He's just someone to negotiate with, and we're after what we really want. And God's saying, well, here's what God's saying, and He's profoundly illustrating that in this story. That's actually death to you. In fact, you're closer to life when you're realizing that there's no hope there. When you're realizing it's bound to let you down. It's bound to fail you. It's not going to be what you want it to be. You're actually closer to life then, because you're closer to God and His deliverance and what He's up to in your heart. which is to show you who He is. So let's continue with the story and talk about the miracle of life. There are the signs, the wonders related to death. Let's talk about the miracle of life. In this story, as many of you know, God is hitting the Egyptians hard, yes. In a way, He's definitely impacting His people too. And what He's doing for His people is He's preserving them, isn't He? I mean, the Egyptians are being struck with death in one form or another, and God's people, the ancient Israelites, are spared over and over and over again. Leading up to, as we mentioned a few minutes ago, the Passover, when the firstborn children in those Israelite homes are spared because of the blood on the doorposts. So God is sparing His people. He's preserving their lives. And as we know, He's leading them to freedom, isn't He? He's leading them out. So they will no longer be subservient to Pharaoh, but they will be under God's headship. That's the Exodus, the way out. God is leading them out to freedom. And freedom, not only in terms of their circumstances, but freedom in terms of the source of their life. God will show Himself to be that source. Amen. And as we've been saying all along, this Exodus story in the Old Testament is parallel to it. It mirrors our own Exodus story as God leads us to Himself through Christ. Over and over we've emphasized that Jesus is Himself the way out, isn't He? That through faith in Him. And I want us to talk more about what that means. That Jesus is life, because that can sound unclear, vague. It sounds nice, but it too can sound a little superstitious, and I don't mean it to be superstitious. I want to help make it more concrete. But one of the things I want to point out before we say more about the life aspect of Jesus, let me just tell you this sort of contrast that's in the Bible that's fascinating. You have the Old Testament, right? And the term the Old Covenant. And this story in the book of Exodus has to do with the inception of the Old Covenant through Moses. And when you contrast the Old Covenant with the New Covenant, which is described in great detail in the New Testament, it's foreshadowed, it's prophesied in the Old Testament, but it's described in great detail and fulfilled in Christ in the New Testament. But these realities of Old Covenant, New Covenant, the old way that God sort of had this agreement with His people and this new agreement with His people, that's what a covenant basically is, a little bit oversimplified, but it's basically that. But in the Old Covenant, it's interesting that Paul, several times, especially in 2 Corinthians chapter 3, refers to the Old Covenant as a ministry of death. He talks about the letters, and he's referring to the law, the tablets of the Ten Commandments that's coming later in the story of Exodus, but he refers to them as letters that kill. The letter kills, he says. Now, think about all the miracles. We talked about how these are miracles of death, aren't they? These are ways God's demonstrating His sovereignty over death, and it's all part of the beginnings of the unfolding of this Old Covenant, and it has this flavor, this feel of death to it all. In fact, the Old Covenant itself, the law that God gives through Moses, will become a death sentence to the ancient Israelites, won't it? Because it says if you're to live, if you're to prosper, you must keep this. And how'd they do? Not so well. And so it becomes a covenant of death. And there's a need for something superior, something better, someone better. And then we have the new covenant. And if the old covenant has this flavor and this feel of death, the new covenant is this covenant of life through provision, where God this time leaves nothing up to people, but says through Jesus, I will fulfill all the terms of the covenant, and I will bestow life and blessing upon you through someone else, through a substitute, who will both take death for you and the curse that you deserve and grant you life. the new covenant, through which Jesus' death takes the penalty of ours, and his life grants us life. I like this graphic. On the left there, if you can see that, there is Golgotha, the 3 empty crosses, the center being the place where Jesus died, or representative of that, of course, this image. And on the right, you have this newness, the resurrection life. This is a picture of the greatest exodus where God's people are brought from death to life by grace through what God has done for us. Showing us that we're not God. We can't do it. Not only can we not do it, but we can't do any of it. If it's up to us, we're cooked. Okay, to use the cool young people terminology. No hope in us. Jesus is the greater exodus. He's the way to life. And we'll say more about what that means. But notice this verse. Proverbs 16:25, this may be familiar to you. There is a way that seems right to a man, but its end is the way of death. The way that seems right to a man, what's natural and instinctive, is to continue looking in this world for life in ways nothing in this world can ever grant it. Nothing in this world, no one in this world, no position in this world, no possession in this world will ever give you security. It will never sustain you. It will never satisfy you. Can't do it. There's nothing and no one in creation that can be for you what only your Creator can be for you. He alone is life. It's natural, it's instinctive. We do it on a regular basis. There are countless ways by which we do it. We're just enticed. We keep looking and looking and looking. But there's no life there. By way of contrast, Jesus says, I am the way and the truth and the life. He is the life. Now, I want to bring all this together because, again, I think this can be a little bit abstract, so hopefully this will help make it more concrete. One last way of tying all this together from the New Testament to the Old Testament, what Jesus said back to the story of Exodus. Brian read earlier John 17, verses 1 through 3. Notice verse 3. This is life, or eternal life, that they may know you, the only true God, and Jesus Christ, whom you have sent. Now, this is fascinating. Life has everything to do with that other underlined word there? No. In the Exodus story, over and over and over again, Moses records God saying things like, I know my people, and I'm going to cause them to know me. He even says, listen to this, he even says of the Egyptians, I will cause them to know me. See, they were living a lie. They were delusional. They had all their false gods. The ancient Israelites, they too weren't any better. They were living a lie also. They didn't know God either. And God said, I'm going to cause them to know me. I'm going to show them who I really am. The source of life. The true sovereign. This is all about knowing God. Having a relationship with Him. And how does God deepen our relationship with Him? Now, there are times when He deepens our relationship with Him through easy, prosperous days. It's true. Blessings that we have, common graces, or other more particular special expressions of grace in our lives. Like, there are times that He calls us to know Him in those ways. It's true. Thankful for that. And you know what's coming. There are times when He calls us to know Him through deep suffering. Isn't that right? Yes. And so often, what the deep suffering is it's the feeling of God prying our cold, dead hands off of the stuff of this world that we cling to. It's God teaching us that there is no life where we go looking for it, that it's not really there. And as we experience that, as God puts to death, listen, our dreams, our plans, as He withholds our desires, as He does those types of things, it feels like we're dying sometimes. Like, God, what are you doing? Why? Why this? And we're tempted to distrust. We're tempted to believe that somehow He's not a good Father, but He is a good Father. Hallelujah. What He's doing is He's teaching us where life is actually found, namely in Him and in Him alone. Here's what it means to live. It means to know that through Jesus Christ, your God has shown you, for you English teachers out there, has shown you, I think that's right, this is what's important, He knows you and He loves you. He's with you and He's for you. He gets you and He's got you. Through Jesus, that's true. And forever and ever and ever, that will not cease to be true. And come what may, nothing and no one can take you out of the Father's hand. So you have absolutely everything for life that you need, don't you? Yes. The source of life and security and satisfaction and significance and all the other good things, He is the wellspring of life. And He says He has you. And as a good Father, sometimes He gives you what you want and sometimes He withholds it. Sometimes you win and sometimes you lose. In the end, we're going to eventually lose everything, aren't we? But we never lose that relationship, that we are known by our God and we know Him through Jesus Christ. That's life. And in this moment, I hope and pray that resonates with you. In this simplicity, the purity of that is life. Thank you, God. Maybe you've heard it said, maybe someone has responded to one of your outbursts this way. Hey, relax. It's not life or death. You ever heard that? It's always helpful, right, when someone says that to you? But there's something to that, saying, relax, it's not life or death. Well, why are we so bothered by whatever we tend to get bothered by? Maybe it's something small, maybe it is something big. But why are we so bothered? Well, fundamentally, it's on some level, we're so bothered because to us it is life and death. We think we do need it to go a certain way. And while a human saying that may not be helpful, when God asks you the question, why does this have you so enslaved? Why is your heart and mind so darkened? Why are you so depressed or angry? What is it that you own that's owning you? When He, in that still small voice, asks you those questions, He's asking you to consider, where does death come from and where does life come from? Who is the source of all good things? God Himself. And we need over and over and over again to learn that lesson. And God had the Israelites on a journey. Ups and downs, twists and turns. And He has us on a journey. And the point of it is really the same. There are some distinctions between Old Covenant and New Covenant. We talked about that a little earlier. But the main point is the same. And in the progressive revelation of God through Jesus Christ, He makes it most clear. God's intention is to save us. And He saves us by showing us who He is. He saves us by telling us that He knows us and He's causing us to know Him. And to be in relationship with Him, that's life. We have Him. More importantly, He has us. That's life.